and welcome to the only table where the screams are the appetizers, and the fear is the main course. Pull up a chair, if you dare. Tonight, the shadows are stretching long, the floorboards are creaking with unseen footsteps, and the air is thick with a whisper you can't quite place. You're listening to the Scare Table, where we serve up the deepest, darkest, and most delightful chills the world has to offer. We have set a place just for you. Get ready to feast on true tales of terror, unsettling legends, and the bizarre happenings that defy explanation. Turn down the lights, lock the doors, and maybe check what's standing behind you. It's time to gather round the Scare Table. Let the haunting begin.
All right, settle in, check your audio levels, and welcome back to the Scare Table, the official Forensic Blueprint podcast brought to you by GhostfaceHorror.com, your ultimate digital media brand for deep dive horror analysis, franchise breakdowns, and structural breakdowns of the genre. If you haven't already, make sure you head over to the site to check out our full text ledger archives, streaming radio station, and complete horror audit sheets.
All right, guys, make sure your batteries are charged, check your audio, and whatever you do, do not look directly into the corners of the room tonight. Welcome back to the Scare Table, your analytical genre workshop, brought to you live by GhostfaceHorror.com, the ultimate high-velocity digital hub for independent horror journalism and forensic genre audits. If you are tuning in from the mainstream, you already know what we do over at the site. We don't deal in lazy studio PR or superficial reviews. We run deep dive, technical autopsies on slasher cinema, psychological thrillers, and indie phenomena. We track the physical media drops, compile the legendary master kill sheets to audit practical effects splatter mechanics, host independent filmmaker interviews, and run the 24/7 Ghostface Horror internet radio stream featuring the heaviest dark industrial tracks and reimagined covers from Studio 3117, The Kill Sheet, and fun, nostalgic Buzzsaw Dubman. And if you think you've got the tactical perimeters to survive a cinematic butcher, you can even stress test your odds right now on our interactive slasher survival calculator. It is a fully fortified fortress of horror content, and the gates are wide open at GhostfaceHorror.com. Tonight, we are leveraging all that analytical machinery to execute a highly anticipated structural audit on the massive box office phenomenon that just completely leveled the independent cinema landscape. Backrooms 2026.
Oh yeah, pull up a stool and grab your hard hats, because we are stepping completely out of reality and clipping straight through the floorboards for this one. Director Kane Parsons, taking his legendary viral internet creepypasta and expanding it into a full-scale feature film debut at just 20 years old, executed a total masterclass in liminal space infrastructure. Along with writer Will Sudik, and producers like James Wan, Sean Levy, and Osgood Perkins, they took a concept born entirely in the digital found footage underground and turned it into a $200 million plus theatrical powerhouse. The blueprint sets us down in the fall of 1990 on the corner of Capitol and McKee in San Jose, California. We follow Clark, Chiwetel Ejiofor, a struggling furniture store owner who finds an anomalous portal hidden behind a wall, mysterious dead-end breaker switches in his shop's basement. When he vanishes into an endless, non-Euclidean labyrinth of moist carpet, sickly yellow wallpaper, and buzzing fluorescent lights, his therapist Mary, Renette Reinsva, is forced to plunge into the architectural void to pull him out. Shane loves this layout because it completely flips the horror script. It isn't about shadows, dark basements, or Gothic castles. It is the terrifying realization of infinite, fully illuminated corporate geometry that completely defies the laws of physical mass.
But psychologically, this film runs a devastating clinical diagnostic on trauma, agoraphobia, and dissociation. Parsons doesn't just treat the backrooms like a cool sci-fi gimmick. The environment is a literal, macro-level physical manifestation of repressed psychological rot. Clark is actively drowning in alcoholism and the wreckage of a brutal divorce, completely crushed by the tenuous financial failure of his store. Meanwhile, Mary is auditing her own deeply rooted generational trauma, tied to an agoraphobic, paranoid mother and the literal demolition of her childhood home. The movie brilliantly posits that these liminal spaces aren't just empty corporate halls. They are a physical manifestation of what happens when the human mind completely detaches from its anchor points, trapping you inside the endless, repetitive corridors of your own unhealed psyche.
The fluorescent grids are buzzing, the 90s camcorder cold open is logged, and the anomalous circuit board is completely live. Let's set the standard parameters for this architectural audit. Given that Kane Parsons chose not to make the entire film a found footage layout like his original YouTube series, instead using a flawless, old-school 10-minute camcorder buffer at the start before transitioning into a sleek, slow-burn cinematic perspective, do you think this structural shift successfully elevated the human stakes of Clark and Mary's psychological trauma? Or did it bleed out some of the raw, first-person terror that made the original creepypasta viral? Marcus, grab your tools and step up to the drafting board first.
All right, let's fire up the engine on this one, because Kane Parsons threw a massive wrench into our expectations with that camera transition. Look, when I first sat down with this one, I had my safety glasses on, expecting 90 minutes of shaky, grain-heavy, first-person found footage chaos, just like the YouTube series. And that opening 10-minute buffer, man, it is a flawless piece of kinetic tension. The camera is locked into that authentic 1990 Panasonic camcorder layout, tracking shots of the cluttered furniture store basement, the slow, creepy buildup as Clark flips those dead breaker switches, and then he clips right through the wall. The minute Mary tracks the anomaly down into that basement and plunges in after him, Parsons pulls off a brilliant piece of cinematic engineering. The movie seamlessly transitions into a sleek, wide, slow-burn cinematic perspective shot by cinematographer Natasha Breyer. And let me tell you, it hits like absolute blunt force trauma. By pulling the camera back and out of the first-person view, Parsons actually amplifies the visceral terror of the space. When you're stuck in found footage, your field of view is limited to wherever the lens is pointing. But when the camera pulls back into a massive, wide cinematic frame, you are suddenly forced to look at the sheer, terrifying scale of the void. You see Chiwetel Ejiofor, who plays his absolute heart out, looking like a tiny, microscopic ant trapped inside 1 million square feet of repeating corporate architecture. The wide lens allows you to track the physical degradation of the environment. You see the columns stretching out into infinity, the subtle, impossible angles of the walls, and the terrifying way a hallway just loops back into itself like a glitching video game. It shifts the horror from a cheap jump scare simulator into a massive, heavy, suffocating weight that completely crushes the characters. It was 100% the right structural move for a feature film.
I'm with you on the scale, Marcus. From an architectural design perspective, that transition from a tight, subjective lens to an objective, wide-angle cinematic frame completely visualizes the infinite geometry. It forces the audience to confront the structural impossibility of the space. But don't you think that pulling the camera out of the character's hand takes away that raw, accidental immediacy that made the original YouTube videos so uniquely terrifying?
Actually, Shane, Marcus just accidentally stumbled right onto the psychological core of the entire movie. That camera transition isn't just a technical trick. It is a visual representation of dissociation.
Hey, I don't do anything accidentally, Chloe. That was pure, calculated, analytical instinct. But go ahead, pull up your medical charts and explain why my camera layout makes the brain shrink.
All right, step back from the lens grid for a second, boys, because the clinical diagnostics on this camera shift are absolutely fascinating. Let me show you how Kane Parsons uses the cinematic frame to map a complete psychological breakdown. Marcus, you are absolutely spot on. That transition from the shaking, claustrophobic camcorder viewfinder to Natasha Breyer's vast, unblinking cinematic frame is the ultimate visual translation of a deep psychological break. In clinical diagnostics, when a patient undergoes extreme psychological trauma, the brain protects itself through dissociation, literally stepping outside of the immediate, painful reality to observe it from an objective, detached distance. Look at what is happening to Clark when he first crosses that porous threshold behind the wall. He isn't just an explorer walking into a strange cave. He is a man whose entire anchoring infrastructure has collapsed. His divorce has isolated him, his business is facing imminent foreclosure, and he is actively drowning in alcoholism. The early 90s camcorder footage represents his desperate attempt to hold on to a tangible, recorded reality. To say, "I am here, this camera is proving I exist." But the moment he drops that camera and the film expands into that wide, cold, cinematic perspective, Kane Parsons is showing us that Clark has completely lost his anchor. By framing him as this tiny, insignificant speck surrounded by millions of square feet of repeating corporate void, the camera layout perfectly mimics agoraphobia and severe emotional detachment. The space feels infinite because Clark's internal despair feels infinite. He has slipped into a realm where there are no walls to hold him up, just an endless, repeating maze of his own unresolved financial and personal failure. And Mary's journey into the maze is even more telling. Her mother was a reclusive agoraphobic, and Mary is actively mourning the literal demolition of her childhood home. She literally carries a chunk of the old concrete sidewalk in her bag just to keep herself grounded. When she steps into the backrooms to pull Clark out, she isn't just playing savior. She is stepping into the literal, geometric manifestation of the genetic, structural isolation she has spent her entire professional career trying to outrun. The camera pulled back because it's no longer just a scary first-person encounter. It is a macroscopic, multi-generational diagnostic of the human mind, completely uncoupling from the world.
That is a brilliant clinical read, Chloe. The camera isn't just looking at the space. It is operating as the actual psychic conduit between their internal rot and the external architecture. But look, if we are running a comprehensive structural audit on this film, we have to talk about how this psychological dissociation intersects with the actual physical threat layout. Because Kane Parsons didn't just leave them alone in an empty office building. Marcus, grab the floor. Let's look at the visceral mechanics of the entities, specifically the terrifying Pirate Clark anomaly and the complete decay of physical mass inside that maze.
Oh man, get your hazard gear on, because the entity design in this film is an absolute masterclass in uncanny kinetic distortions. In the original lore, everyone knows the standard bacteria or wire monsters, those tall, skeletal, screeching things made out of distorted industrial tripods. But Kane Parsons and Osgood Perkins took a massive leap forward for the feature film build by introducing the Pirate Clark anomaly. And it is one of the most deeply upsetting things I have ever audited on a movie screen. Clinically and visually, it isn't just a monster chasing a guy down a hallway. It is a corrupted, shifting duplicate of Clark himself. But the geometry is all wrong. When Mary first spots it, it looks like a normal human silhouette. But as it starts to advance, the audio design switches over to this wet, glitching, tape-speed distortion, and the creature's physics completely break down. Its limbs move with a hyperspeed mechanical twitching, like a stop-motion puppet being yanked by broken strings. Its jaw unhinges past human capability, and its torso violently elongates to fit the impossible, non-Euclidean height of the ceiling. It's a visceral nightmare because it plays on our biological recognition of the human form and completely warps it into a broken, glitched asset. It's the visual equivalent of a file format corrupting right in front of your eyes.
And that structural corruption isn't just limited to the entity, Marcus. The actual structural mass of the environment undergoes a complete material phase decay in the third act. Look at the scene where a chair he finds in Sector 4 is melted into the floor. The chair is literally liquefied, melted directly into the floor like a digital asset losing its collision mesh. The architecture itself becomes hostile, not by collapsing on you, but by refusing to maintain consistent physical rules.
which perfectly maps back to the psychological diagnostic. When your internal world completely fragments, your perception of external stability dissolves entirely. That chair melting or the hallway stretching is the literal physical visualization of a severe panic attack. The environment is gaslighting the characters, stripping away the basic laws of physics until they can no longer trust their own senses.
All right, Chloe, you caught me with my keys already in the ignition. But you know I never back down from a metrics check. What I absolutely loved, hands down, it is the sound design during the entity pursuit sequences. When that Pirate Clark anomaly gets moving, the audio engineers didn't just use standard monster growls. They layered in this sickening, high-frequency screech of metal fatigue mixed with the wet, rhythmic thud-thud-thud of a broken VCR tape slapping inside a deck. When it gets close to the camera, the sound literally pans aggressively across the theater speakers, desynchronizing from the visual frame. It is an absolute masterpiece of auditory trauma engineering that makes your skin crawl before you even see the creature's limbs twitch. What I would change? I wanted more kinetic payoff during the Sector 4 collapse. Don't get me wrong, the slow burn tension of watching the chairs and desks liquefy into the carpet like a bad rendering glitch was beautifully creepy. But right when the physics of that sector completely fractured, I wanted to see a high-velocity, catastrophic structural demolition. Let the walls delaminate, let the ceiling panels fall upward into a reverse gravity vortex. They built an incredible engine of physical decay, but they tapped the brakes right when they could have delivered a multi-million-dollar sequence of pure environmental chaos.
Marcus, you are a total octane addict. Tapping the brakes is exactly what kept the load-bearing tension from collapsing into a generic CGI action film. But here's my blueprint readout, Chloe. What I absolutely loved: the spatial layout of the San Jose Central Office sequence. About midway through the film, Clark wanders out of the yellow wallpaper corridors and stumbles into a massive 3-story interior atrium that looks exactly like an abandoned late 1980s corporate headquarters, complete with dead ficus plants, dust-covered cubicles, and a massive glass skylight. But when he looks through the skylight, instead of seeing the California night sky, he just sees another endless ceiling of fluorescent office lights stretching out into infinity. It is an absolute masterstroke of architectural gaslighting. It gives the character, and the audience, the false psychological hope of an exit, only to reveal that the exterior world has been entirely deleted and replaced by corporate geometry. What I would change: the breaker switch mythology in the basement layout. At the start of the film, Clark's entry into the Backrooms is triggered by flipping those 3 dead breaker switches in a highly specific, rhythmic sequence. To me, that feels like a minor narrative design flaw. By introducing a mechanical, puzzle-like trigger in the real world, it slightly undermines the cosmic, accidental horror of the original creepypasta. The Backrooms are terrifying because they are a systemic glitch in reality, a place you accidentally clip into when you take a wrong turn. Making it feel like a secret doorway that requires a specific electrical combination turns a cosmic anomaly into a standard haunted house mechanism.
Perfect logs, boys. Marcus wants more flying drywall, and Shane wants the universe to remain completely unmapped and chaotic. You two are beautifully consistent. For me, I absolutely loved the clinical portrayal of Mary's generational agoraphobia, mapping onto the endless walls of the maze. But if I could change one thing, I'd cut down the 5-minute exposition scene where the tech support logs try to explain the anomaly's timeline. Evil is always much more potent when you leave the diagnostic report slightly incomplete.
The final metrics are locked, the opinions are stamped, and the table is officially clear. But what do you think? How did this film hold up? Did it meet or surpass your expectations, or completely fail? Let us know.
Now hit the music for real this time. See you on the main deck at ghostfacehorror.com.
Sunrise burning on a a Kingston street, yeah. Yeah, the man checking the vibe, feeling the heat here. Yeah, got the delay set low, the reverb high. Gonna lay down a rhythm neath the wide blue sky. Walking past the shop with the old neon sign. Heard a sound from within that was totally mine, but not mine, cause that ain't no street. That's a real and a strong. Gotta be Buzzsaw, yeah, the new cat in town. From big city noise and a concrete beat. True, gonna take that distortion and see what we can do. Dumbing on the mix, a Buzzsaw on the axe. Freak your rhythm, gonna loosen up the tax. Dumbing on the mix, a Buzzsaw on the axe. Freak your rhythm, gonna loosen up the tax. Sitting in the back, sweating out the fear. Amp on 11, can nobody hear? Set the feedback, screaming and a power chord punch. Been playing the clubs on a caffeine lunch. My fingers bleeding, my voice is getting rough. Think about taking it in, I've had enough. And the door swung open, the cloud of earth smoke rolled in. A brother with dreadlocks, a wise knowing grin. Cause that ain't no shriek, that's a wail and a strong. Gotta beat, that's a wail and a strong drum. Gotta be Buzzsaw, yeah, the new cat in town. From big city noise and a concrete beat. True, gonna take that distortion and see what we can do. Dumb man on the mix, a Buzzsaw on the axe. Freak your rhythm, gonna loosen up the tax. Dumb man on the mix, a Buzzsaw on the axe. Freak your rhythm, gonna loosen up the tax. Hold up, brother, slow it down. Whoa, whoa, you got the fire, but you need to let it grow. Cut the high end, let the bass drum thump. My wah pedal stuck, what is this dump? No dumping, man, this is space and this is time. Let the echo play, let the signal climb. Now drop that record, 1, 2, 3, and let the vibration set the spirit free. Cause that ain't no shriek, that's a wail and a strum boom. Gotta be Buzzsaw, yeah, the new cat in town. From big city noise and a concrete beat. True, gonna take that distortion and see what we can do. Coming on the mix, a Buzzsaw on the axe. Freak your rhythm, gonna loosen up the tax. Dumb man on the mix, a Buzzsaw on the axe. Gonna loosen up the tax. Funk a reggae, buzz a dub, yeah. Funk a reggae, buzz a dub.
Hey, glad you stuck around for a second. Shane and Marcus already packed up their gear and headed out to the garage, arguing about horsepower and camera lenses. But to be honest, I couldn't just flip the breakers and walk away tonight. Not after auditing a piece of architecture like A24's Backrooms. The boys love the jump scares, the entity sprints, and the industrial shredding of it all. But what makes this film a true modern masterpiece of psychological horror isn't what's chasing you down those hallways. It's the terrifying realization of what those hallways are. Think about Clark. When he clips through that wall, he isn't just trapped in an infinite corporate maze. He is trapped inside the exact shape of his own psychological avoidance. He is a man who was already completely lost in the white noise of his own life. The alcoholism, the isolation of the divorce, the suffocating pressure of his failing store. The Backrooms didn't steal him from reality. They just handed him a physical space that perfectly matched his internal dissociation. It's that terrifying, clinical threshold where your mind finally uncouples from its anchor points, and the universe responds by building a prison out of your most repetitive, empty memories. When you close your eyes tonight, just remember, the scariest monster in the liminal void isn't the thing twitching in the dark. It's the fear that if you run far enough into the maze, you'll eventually find out you're the one who built it. If you want to dive deeper into the clinical psychology behind your favorite nightmares, we are keeping the laboratory lights on over at ghostfacehorror.com. It's our independent, high-velocity digital hub where we run forensic autopsies on slasher metrics, host exclusive indie interviews, track physical media drops, and stream the Ghostface Horror internet radio 24/7. And if you think your own mental perimeter is tough enough to survive an apex predator, make sure to stress test your psyche on our interactive slasher survival calculator. The table is officially clear. The files are boxed. Take a deep breath, ground yourself in reality, and make sure you're anchored before you step out into the dark. I'm Chloe. Good night, wherever you are.
The scare table. Let the haunting